Crawford, Deborah Medina, Jim Hightower, and then we'll open up for questions. Okay? Thank you so much.
Thanks to everybody for being here today. And just as a preface, I am not a politician. I'm not anyone who really feels comfortable here yet, but I'm learning how this works. And what's encouraging to me today is there's people who are willing to listen to landowners and listen to issues that are not politically charged, but they're what's right for Texas. So Deborah and I today spent the morning talking to some folks, and I was sharing my story as a landowner. And for those who may not know the story, I'm the manager of our family farm up in Lamar County. It's 650 acres that my grandfather bought in 1948. And I'm charged with taking care of that place. So 3 years ago, actually it's more than that, probably 5 years ago when TransCanada showed up and we asked them, can you find another route around the property? They said, no, we're coming across. And that started a process where I have learned eminent domain and condemnation of your land firsthand. So we didn't buy the fact that TransCanada is a common carrier and that they have the right to take our land because it's very obscure, the Railroad Commission, when they rubber stamp that common carrier permit. So we are currently in litigation with TransCanada. At the lower court, we said we don't believe you're a common carrier. You have to come to the table with some proof. And in a 15-word ruling sent from his iPhone, the Lamar County Court at Law judge says they can take the Crawford's land. We have appealed that. We are ruling. We have a hearing now in the appellate court, 6th Circuit Court of Appeals in Texarkana on July the 30th. But we will again say we don't believe a Canadian corporation transporting a product made in Canada has the right to take a Texan's land. TransCanada didn't wait for us to get to court and talk about that. They're almost done with their pipeline across my land. So I'm here as a landowner who's living and breathing eminent domain abuse. And working with people who are much more knowledgeable about how this building moves and shakes, because we want public hearings. We want people who were unable to come to Austin to speak at some of these committee meetings to hear what this stuff is, to learn about the process, to learn how it impacts their water. For the first responders in these cities to know how to attack say if a spill happens. This is not just about how land is taken. It's about our safety of our water, the integrity of our land, and the true transparency for all of our citizens. Thank you.
I'm Deborah Medina. I'm Executive Director with We Texans, and as Julia said, we've been knocking on doors here at the legislature today. I think there's all kinds of rumors that flow around the Capitol, and one of those was that this issue would be added to a special session call. What we primarily have communicated to leadership in the House and the Senate is that we believe that would be premature. There were 4 bills in this most recent legislative session that couldn't even get to the floor of the chambers, and they couldn't get to the floor of the chambers because there has not been enough information, there's not been enough discussion about the issues that are facing Texans. And so what we've asked for is for the leadership of the House and Senate to call interim committee hearings, to hold public hearings outside of Austin throughout the parts of Texas where we see the very high activity, prevalent activity in the oil and gas sector. As Julia indicated, we have eminent domain issues, we have water concerns, there are lots of private property concerns, there's concerns from industry about how this process is going to work, and if we are to do it well for all of Texas so that everybody benefits, then we need to have some public hearings so that we understand what those issues are and we get good law as a result of that. So we are asking leadership of the House and Senate to have an interim charge that would address this issue and then to have public hearings around the state of Texas. And I think Jim Hightower has been on this issue for a long time, so we'll let you talk as well.
Yes, what we have here is an escalation in the continuing assault by corporate power on family farmers in Texas, not just in Lamar County, but throughout East Texas, down in South Texas, out in West Texas as well. An assault that is a function of ignorance and arrogance in action. And that's why I'm here standing with Julia Crawford, because she's standing for us, for all the people. of this state. And this is an issue that has been under wraps for too long. And that's why Deborah, Public Citizen, so many organizations have come together here to try to air this out a little bit, so people of Texas might begin to know about it. That's the first thing, is the folks don't know what's going on. And that is a failure of the leadership. Julia was saying she was here to defer to people who have more knowledge than she does about how this place works, the Capitol. Mostly, Julia, it doesn't work, and that's what we're facing here. Our legislative leaders have been weaker than Canadian hot sauce when it comes to standing up for the farmers and rural people generally, and for our environment, our land, and our water against this multi-billion-dollar transnational Canadian corporation. Coming in to take over the land of farmers. This is a travesty of Texas justice. It is a mockery of democracy for them to be allowed to use what are called quick takes, and that phrase pretty well says it. It is quick and it is a taking from the people of our state, and people who are often isolated out in rural areas and are not connected together. And that's the importance of these organizations teaming up in what Deborah has called a cross-partisan coalition. And that's very well put. It is a coalition, and a very broad one, and a nonpartisan one, because this is not a partisan issue, it's a Texan issue. But also, it's appropriate to call it cross-partisan because we are cross. We are angry about this failure to stand up on something so big. And that's my final thought, is that this is too big for the insiders, too big for the lawyers and lobbyists who dominate this place. This is so big that it's got to go to the people, and that's why we're asking the top leadership of the legislature to take it to the people, take it out of this little cocoon here in Austin, in hearings all across the state, so people can know about it, begin to talk about it among themselves, and then let the people themselves decide. When I first moved here to Austin back in the mid-'70s, there was a moving company here that had an advertising slogan that fits this situation, I think. This little moving company said, if we can get it loose, we can move it. That's what we're trying to do, is get it loose at the grassroots level, and then the people will move it for themselves. Thank you for being here.
I was remiss in not letting folks know that Environment Texas is here, as well as Public Citizen. We really appreciate you guys being here today. So open for questions for the speakers.
I'm Polly from Texas Energy Report, and I just wondered, has your door knocking today included the governor's office, and how would you characterize the sort of reception you're getting?
We did not make it to the governor's office today. We talked to the lieutenant governor, speaker, committee leaders in both the House and Senate, authors of the bills that went through the last legislative session. I think folks are a little still wrapped up in this current special, anticipating maybe a second special, and acknowledging that we're on the front leading edge, if you will, of thinking about what ought to be happening during the interim. So everybody was receptive to our request, and some intend to follow up with us. And we had a member actually say he wants to sit down with Julia and hear more about her lawsuit and kind of the issues there. So I think we had pretty good receptivity today.
It was enlightening for me. I was expecting a little bit more standoffish, but I was very encouraged by people's willingness to listen, take the lead behind information, and give us some pretty candid feedback on what they were hearing. So I was encouraged.
Okay. And in terms of water, that's a really big issue. And eminent domain, I mean, I know y'all are talking about them together, but do you see the potential for joint hearings of committees on these issues? In terms of, anyway.
I think that came together for me as a result primarily of a town hall that we did in November of 2011, where we just put in the local paper that we were going to talk about property rights issues and eminent domain in the Eagle Ford Shale. When the landowners came, there were 100 landowners. individual after individual brought predominantly two issues: the eminent domain condemnations by the pipelines and their concerns about water, its availability, and what was happening with it and how it was going to affect that farmer and rancher. No one was really critical of the development. In fact, people were pretty happy that the development was going on, but they were very concerned about what's going on with the water and are we using it reasonably and what are we doing with it. And so those are the things that I'm hearing. We're getting phone calls like that from West Texas as well, out of the Permian Basin. I don't know that any of us are standing here saying we have the solutions. What we're saying is the people need to talk about it. We need to have a greater understanding about it, shake it loose, and get some solutions to kind of come out of that process.
Well, and if I can, let me talk about the water a bit. You know, water was, the integrity of the water that I have water rights to out of my creek to irrigate my farm was never part of the discussions with TransCanada. So only because I stepped up and said, I want some baseline studies on my water and my well before you start construction so that I know where I am today. It's only because I pushed that issue out, and TransCanada then, to their credit, they did fund some water studies. But as you know, that maybe needs to be part of a standardized process. So if you're crossing these waterways, because President Obama blanketly gave the water crossing permits to the Army Corps of Engineers, my concern is it's a one-size-fits-all project across any waterway. Bodart Creek might be different than the Red River, might be different from the Sulphur River. So I think what I'm learning as this process is there's lots of different moving parts, and certainly the integrity of the water is one aspect of it, whether they're crossing the creek next to you or on your neighbor's land.
Let me just add that water links this movement together, literally, because a tar sand spill on Bodart Creek won't stay there. It runs down that aquifer all the way to the Rio Grande and all the way into Arkansas. And some would say that's probably better water than Arkansas has anyway, so good enough. But this is a coalition effort that literally is tied to water.
If I could just, so Deborah, as someone who advocated reform in the lead up to the session this year, it might confuse people now to hear you say we should take a step back. You don't want to see this taken up in a hypothetical kind of special. Can you kind of explain the reasoning for that a little more?
Well, my concern is that a special is 30 days. And we saw during this session, especially in the Senate State Affairs Committee, right there towards the end of session, where the members were asking questions. There seemed to be confusion about what the issues were and what the process is today. How do we fix it if we don't even understand what the process is today? We've got to understand the process. We've got to know where the problems are in order to come up with some good solutions. If we didn't get that done in a 140-day session, we're not going to get it done in a 30-day session with the other issues on the call. So we regretted that we didn't have hearings in the Senate during the last interim. We have applauded Chairman Olivetta's work that he did during the interim and during the session on this issue, and I think many of us here today said we thought his bill was the strongest, but clearly there's not an agreement on these issues, and so 30 days in a special is just not ample time to do that. To get to remedy, we thought it would be premature to add it to a special, and we think it needs more study. Or, I mean, they could just do it the way I want. But barring that, we think it needs more study.
Hold on one second. Any more questions from the press?
Have you talked to any environmental experts about potential problems and got advice on them on what some of the damages and dangers could be?
I think when Chairman Olivetta did a hearing during the interim, there were witnesses from probably all aspects of this. Oil and gas industry testified, landowners testified, environmental activists testified, but that's really been the only committee during the interim that took kind of extensive testimony. Then we got into session and we're running full speed, so testimony was pretty abbreviated, and those members who maybe didn't have the familiarity, members outside of these areas that didn't have the familiarity with the issues were struggling to kind of understand how complex they are, because there's a lot of different issues that come together here, and that's why today we've approached many committees, not just a single committee, but we've talked to Energy Resources and Land and Resource Management and State Affairs and Natural Resources, because it does affect a broad spectrum of the law.
How many pipelines do you have cutting across the state? Or how many are there cutting across the state? Do you know?
There are tens of thousands of miles. I don't know how many companies.
How many companies,
Yeah.
not pipelines, how many companies, like Seaway and this TransCanada and all? Do you have any idea?
I have no idea.
I know Texas has more miles of pipeline than any other state in the U.S., but I don't know how much.
There's another problem associated with that is that they don't have to tell us. Thanks to the Patriot Act, it exempted pipelines from public disclosure and discovery.
And that's part of the problem I'm seeing with some of my neighbors in other parts of the state is, as it's one thing for a new pipeline to be built, and this is a product that's being transported across Texas that's never been in a pipe, it's tar sands. The other issue is there are old pipelines being repurposed and being reversed so that the flow is opposite from what it was, transporting a product for which that pipe was never intended. And the landowners in those neighborhoods are not having to be told what's going on. So, it's a little bit of a bait and switch, I think, going on here that needs to be exposed as well.
Has the Pegasus pipeline spill in Mayflower, Arkansas brought much momentum to y'all's campaign?
Well, I drove 5 hours to go see it myself. When I heard that spill occurred, knowing that was the exact same product TransCanada was intending to bring across my property, I got in the car and drove up there. And a week after the spill, it was still unbelievable. I'm standing at a subway, and 50 feet away, there are people hosing this stuff down, forcing it down the ravine to the waterways. You could still smell it. So, I just went because I wanted to say, I have seen this, and the thought of seeing what I was witnessing firsthand happen on my property was it made me even more fervent to just do what I could to, take my story and make it more than just my property's fight.
And it is a national fight. I was in Oklahoma City last weekend, and there's a great group out there called the Great Plains Tar Sands Resistance, and a woman named Nancy Zorn, 79-year-old grandmother, put her neck on the line about this tar sands issue, literally. She went out and with a U-shaped bicycle lock attached herself to what's called an excavator, machine about the size of this room here, to put a stop to what was going on. Obviously they had her arrested and they're back doing it, but that inspired a lot of people around the country. And then they were in turn inspired by what happened in Mayflower. And they're connected to people up in Nebraska and everywhere else it's a national battle, and it's a movement that is building.
Well, and one thing I want to say this, it is unbelievable to me that people think the Keystone XL is a pipeline that has not yet been built, that we're waiting on President Obama's decision about the XL. Well, what they did is when the president denied the permit at first, TransCanada uncoupled this southern leg. And for those of y'all that live in Texas, you know that it's about 80% finished across Oklahoma and Texas. When people think we're still fighting against the XL, the little sister is already built down here, and they're saying I've heard 80 to 90% done right now.
So
Working 7 days a week sometimes on my property
so
to get it done.
What we're doing here in Texas is going to go up north once this section's built and the other pipeline more than likely gets approved.
Come again on that, because I'm not going to concede anything right now.
No. So the work that we're starting on right now, that y'all are starting here in Texas, is going to travel up north.
Oh, absolutely. We got a lot of people watching. I mean, our Nebraska pipeline fighters up in Nebraska are watching what we're doing here. And part of what I learned in doing my own homework on water, Nebraska had wanted to see it, because what I took were the MSDS sheets that I got as part of my lawsuit. And I took them to a lab saying, I want my water tested against all of these products. And so Nebraska has learned a lot about that. So we're sharing. TransCanada, I think, is starting to figure it out. This is a bigger movement. It's not just Texans. It's Texans and Oklahomans and Nebraskans and everybody else. And, just from my perspective, my family is fighting this case with a legal defense fund funded by people like you. And I have 3 binders of notes and cards and Post-it notes from people who've sent me money from all over the world. So this, you talk about it's not just Texas. This is about the world watching what's happening here on how people stand up for their land.
I think it's important because maybe a big part of what happened, Mose, in this session was that eminent domain seemed to be just a problem that we're dealing with in 18 counties in East Texas where there's a keystone. But it's not just a problem in 18 counties in East Texas where there's a keystone. We have an Eagle Ford shale play that's very active, and the landowners there are saying the same sort of things that Julia's saying, and the landowners in the Permian Basin are saying the same sorts of things. We have got to have public hearings so that we can hear from people that are affected, so that we can hear from industry. I bet most of you drove here in a car today. We all want a healthy, vibrant energy sector, but we also want landowner rights protected, we want natural resources protected, we want clean drinking water. So this is an issue for all of Texas. It should not be characterized as an anti-anything. It should be coming together to find solutions. And I really like your analogy of shaking it loose so we understand what's really happening and how do we solve those problems. And that's what we're here saying to the leadership in the Capitol is this is a big issue. It's a big issue in Texas, but it is drawing attention from all over. We need to lead, we need studies, and we need hearings.
Did all three of you go together to talk to the legislators? Okay.
I was her wingman.
Okay.
Yes. We keep talking about one pipeline. Seaway Pipeline is in Grimes County doing precisely the same thing that all of you have talked about. So it is a Texas problem.
And
Thank you.
For media, you have somebody who's an affected person who's talking about this, and they're on our list. If you want to talk to more landowners, just let us know.
Thank you all.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very
so
much.
Thank you.